Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Broncos, the Thursday edition. Some may say the best edition of the podcast. It's part two. We were talking about the quarterbacks, joined by Robby Davis, of course, today. We're going to talk about some Spencer Rattler, Michael Penix, Bo Nix. It's going to be a really good show. Boggins, I already see you in the chat. Yeah, we're talking Michael Penix today, bro. It's your day. Paul's in the chat. Shout out to Paul. We weren't able to acknowledge this last time, but he put $50 in the chat right as we ended last time. Shout out to you, Paul. You're the best, man. Seriously, shout out to you. But let's get into it. I first want to start off with the Broncos are bringing in Levi Wallace, cornerback, formerly of the Buffalo Bills, and then before that, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Tomorrow for a workout. Frankie, what are your initial thoughts on this? And then Robby will get to you.
Cool. I don't know. It's a pretty, seems like a pretty, they haven't made it yet. I'd assume it would be a fairly cheap contract because he's around at this point in free agency still. You know, he's a CB2 and he's kind of always been a CB2. He's at that 28, 29 point range. So you'd assume he's kind of going to get a shorter deal. So if Denver's able to make the signing, I think it's a really smart move. As I just stated, this is a very experienced player that I think every season he's played has played at least 600 or 700 snaps. So on a term of this guy, I think is going to be on the field. I think that's a big plus. This team needs a veteran. You know, they moved off of Fabian Moreau last offseason, who kind of gave them a few weeks of decent play and then kind of really fell off, I think, as the season kind of hit that back nine. So I think this is kind of a decent upgrade, but also just kind of it doesn't stop you from letting one of these younger guys overtake him. Because I'd imagine you're not going to invest too much into this guy. So yeah, I like the move. I think it kind of fits what Vance wants to do just based on my memory. I haven't gone back and looked at his tape too much, but from what I remember, he's a pretty decent press man corner. So I think being able to have more of those guys who also has a long career with a lot of production ball skill wise, which it seems like the defense really wants to kind of have those big swing plays. They want to get those sacks. They want to get turnovers. They want to force fumbles. They want to get picks. So I think this is a guy that helps with that a lot, especially when you talk about he should be receiving a lot of targets if he's when he's opposite Patrick Surtain. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good move for the room. If they end up making it low risk move that I think can just be a solid placeholder that doesn't really limit the upside of the other guys behind him too, if they still want to give those guys looks.
Yeah, depth, right? Robby, do you have a take about our man Levi Wallace here?
No, I mean, I 100% agree with Frankie. Look, that position, they just need guys on that boundary, period. I don't think they're in a position to be really picky with who they sign in free agency. I think they just got to look, is he a scheme fit? Is there something that we at least can bet on and then move from there? I don't think it's the end of the world when it comes to Riley Moss. I don't think it's really an indication of much of anything. They need bodies in that room. They went out, saw what was out there and available. They got a guy who's got good size, good length, just a depth guy.
Yeah. Hey, well, okay. So Atomic 626 says, yeah, Fabian Moreau actually hurt me during the Raiders games. This brings me to a question I want to ask you guys real quick. Is this better? Do you guys think this is better than if the Broncos just went out there and signed Fabian Moreau back, who already knows the scheme, was in it last year? Is this an upgrade over Fabian Moreau, Robby, do you think?
I believe so, yeah. I don't want to be too hard on Moreau, but man, it was a rough season for him. And although Levi is probably coming off his worst season of his career, from 2018, the year he was drafted, to 2022, he had a pretty solid stat line, which is something that isn't easy to obtain for a cornerback, the most volatile position in sports, period. And for him to be able to put on a consistent, solid showing for 4 years straight, I think, it gives them a little trepidation with his last season in Pittsburgh last year. But when you have a solid body of work like he does, I just think it's a move you've got to make, especially in the position that they're in. So yes, I think it's an upgrade.
Okay. I like to hear that. Fabian Moreau's tackling, man, it killed me sometimes. It wasn't that he wouldn't take the guy down. It was that he wouldn't attack the ball carrier ever. He'd sit there and wait for the guy every single time. It drove me insane. It was like this 2-yard gain turns into 7 when Fabian Moreau's out there making the tackle. Frankie, what do you make of this one? Is he better than him?
I won't speak on it yet, but I mean, probably. I think it was a pretty low bar to cross. When did they acquire Fabian Moreau? In training camp, in a preseason last year? from what I remember, it was a pretty late in the year signing. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I think the expectations already were pretty low. They ended up getting, I think, below probably what that expectation was, or maybe right where that was. So I don't think it would be too hard of a bar to cross for it to be better. But yeah, I mean, I think it'd be pretty easy for him to cross it. So yes, I would say this is probably an upgrade. As far as the run stuffing stuff, he was a better run defender in Buffalo. Like, he was pretty good in that defense at defending the run. So, and he kind of fell off of that a little bit while he was in Pittsburgh. And while it's so weird because Fabian Moreau like wasn't good against the run for Denver last year, but he has like decent numbers. Like, he didn't miss a lot of tackles. He was actually getting a lot of tackles for loss, like behind the line of scrimmage. So I don't know. It'll be interesting kind of seeing how that translates. But I do think, like, as far as in coverage, I do think he'll be an upgrade.
Okay, cool. Hey, I like it. We got enough Levi Wallace in for today. The guy's not even a Bronco yet.
I can't wait till he doesn't sign.
It's gonna
Right?
be a minimum 1 year deal. There's gonna be zero guaranteed. It's gonna be, I don't even know why we're
Gets
starting.
cut for Damari Mathis.
Yeah, 6 minutes in on Levi. You got enough, man. All right, we're gonna go quarterbacks. That's the main topic here today, and I want to start off with Bo Nix. Robbie, I want to start off with you on Bo Nix. Give me your thoughts, because on the timeline, man, you have been one of the Bo Nix, I wouldn't say like guys, because you've been pretty out there and like, hey, I don't know if I were the decision maker, if I would take this guy at 12. But you do think there are good things here, and you do think that it could make sense for the Broncos. So I'm curious why you think that.
Oh man, it's my time to shine here, boys. So listen, when I went into the Bo Nix tape, I wasn't expecting anything, great. I wasn't expecting anything to stand out going into it. When I watched it, like, I just saw a guy who was super well-rounded, like, in everything. He could especially layer the ball. I think he's one of the best pure passers in the draft, and I know people are going to see that and think that I'm calling him QB1, which I'm not. I think he is one of the better guys in this class when it comes to knowing how much to put on a ball and knowing when to put however much he needs to on a ball. He had very good deep accuracy and one of the better accuracy numbers in those short intermediate ranges when it came to giving guys yak opportunities. And again, he's just a really solid player. And I think a lot of the hesitance when it comes to him is the same case that I think with JJ McCarthy. I think it's a lot of false equivalences. I see people say, okay, he doesn't have a big number of just straight drop back plays that aren't swing screens or just aren't these little fun creative things that Oregon does. And I think people just equate that to him not being able to do anything other than that. And I don't think that's true at all, because when we look at the tape and when you see these true drop back snaps, like a 3rd and 6+ where those screens and all those funky motions aren't really going to be available to you, he performed well on those plays, and he showed that he can play within structure. And not only that, but his eyes were in the right place. He wasn't avoiding a certain area of the field. Again, eyes was what immediately stood out to me. His eyes, whether it was one of those short 5-yard swing plays or it was a intermediate high-low on a hook defender, his eyes were in the right place. The only thing that really stood out to me that was negative was Oregon didn't, their offensive line bullied guys across their schedule. Every single game, their offensive line was better than the defensive line. So we didn't see a lot of snaps of him working pressure. And on some of the ones that we did, things started to kind of break down for him. He didn't have that consistent good base that I saw on tape whenever the pocket broke down. He's had a tendency to drift a little bit and kind of all arm his throws. And I don't think his arm is, it's not going to be a top 10 arm in the league when he gets drafted. But for me, when I think of arm, I don't think of how far you can throw. All I think about is, can you beat defenders to a window when they're closing on a ball, and can you fit the ball into that window? So I saw him be able to do that. Again, it wasn't, strong enough to where he could get away with just being all arm on some of these throws. He's a guy who really relies on that lower half torque that he creates from his hips. That's where a majority of his arm strength comes from, not necessarily his arm or his physical talent. But this guy is just super solid, man. And I just think a lot of the knocks on him aren't things that are of substance. I think it's just a lot of false equivalences.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, I think he was one of the more consistent quarterbacks in college football last year. I do agree with you. I think when pressure came, and it didn't come very often. The drifting was what kind of drove me insane when I was watching his film, like just the drifting. And I don't know if this is just like Russell Wilson PTSD, but how a quarterback handles pressure right now is like I am like zoned in on how the hell they do this. So yeah, I don't know. I think that is a worry, but I do think that I think people are lower on Bo Nix than they should be, and because of stuff that he can't control. I thought you brought up really great points there, Robbie. Frankie, what do you make of Bo Nix? Do you agree with Robbie here? Do you disagree?
I concur with a lot of stuff he said. Yeah, Bo Nix is like a very solid quarterback prospect. He's got really good, or not really good, but he's got pretty decent size. Like I want to say he's like 6'4", 6'5". He's got like decent bulk to him too. He's not super easy to bring down the pocket. Has a good enough arm to push the ball wherever you want to, and has the ability to throw on the run too, which is a really cool thing. Like that some of these other quarterbacks we'll talk about later don't necessarily have as great of. So it's pretty easy to envision him playing in a lot of different offenses if you need to, get him booted outside the pocket. Has the athleticism to scramble a little bit as well. My Nix was just very weird. And then other things I'll say too. He was kind of, I think, when you talk about a guy that like has been in playing college football, is a 5th-year starter, 4th-year starter, 6th-year starter, whatever he is. So we're going to talk about so many guys that are just billion-year starters this year today. But Bo Nix, 5th-year starter, I believe. He looks the part of a 5th-year starter. You can see that, especially with this being his 2nd year in the Oregon offense. He was very comfortable in this offense. You could see him, like, as Robbie said, he was connecting dots, like, okay, I've run this play against this coverage multiple times. I know where my eye should be when. You could see kind of when maybe he's facing a little bit of a pressure. Sometimes he'd rush a throw and he'd in a good way, like he would, accelerate his drop or kind of like hurry the throwing motion to be able to get it in. So that stuff I thought was really good. Where my concern came in definitely was, so, I mean, we kind of talked about it. This Oregon team, kind of like Michigan was with J.J. McCarthy, they were just trouncing so many teams. I mean, there are very few games on the schedule that I'd say are within like even a reasonable margin. Like it's mainly like 4 or 5 score blowouts. The amount of games that Bo Nix did not finish where I'd get like 70 plays in or 50 plays in. It's like, oh, where'd he go? Number 13's in the game now. Well, they're up 60-13. They're going to take him out. That is, I guess. So let me finish my thought. The close games, and there weren't many, but there were probably like 3. That's where a little bit of my concern came in. I think when he has a big lead, and I think when the surroundings are great, he's a lot more confident with his ability to push the ball down the field. You see him a lot more willing to take those highs on high-low reads, to push the ball over the middle, to try to take throws up the seam. I did get a little bit concerned, especially in like the Texas Tech game. I'm trying to think of other ones, like one of the Washington games. I want to say even in USC a little bit as well. There just was a little bit of like, okay, I need to be the guy to win a game. And I don't think you necessarily saw him take the reins as much as you might have liked to in the games when they became close. But even so, it didn't usually matter because Oregon ended up winning most of the time anyways. The fading away, like throwing off his back foot, definitely something else that I was kind of like, ooh, like, as you've said, this Oregon offensive line was kind of bullying people most of the year. There weren't a lot of times when he really had a kind of obstructed pocket, but the times there was, it seemed like it affected him more than it should. And especially when we're talking about a guy who, I mean, I don't think this is necessarily what should happen, but say a guy that ends up going top 15 to one of these teams that, as a, most time, if a team is picking in the top half of the first round, they probably don't have perfect surroundings on offense. They probably don't have a great offensive line. You might not have perfect weapons on the outside. And I just wonder how it'll look when the surroundings aren't as great. I do also wonder, like, as we were saying, with the comfort in the offense stuff, it was hard to tell sometimes if he was truly anticipating throws because of the defense he was seeing, or if it was just more of, okay, the play is telling me to go here, so I'm going to go here. Like, I saw that a lot. Like, I think to kind of, you'd almost have to build in, like, okay, here's the play where you're throwing the ball downfield for him a little bit more than you might with some of these other quarterbacks, just because I think he's just one of those where if you can have just only 2 options for him, and one of them is that, deep, super high, that's probably the best way to structure your offense for him, to make sure he's actually taking those shots. But yeah, I mean, he seems like a decent floor player. Again, like, you can just see so much tangible growth in his time throughout college football. Like, yes. I forget if it was Daniel Jeremiah or Dane Brugler who said, like, you don't see Auburn Bo Nix when you watch the Oregon tape. And that's very true. But I also, I guess, am a little bit concerned that it does feel like Bo Nix has maybe retreated a little bit into his shell, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that's a little concerning before a guy makes the jump to the next level. Because at the next level, it's going to get a lot faster. Windows are going to be smaller. The bodies are going to be bigger. Pockets are going to be much more rough. I don't want to see him retreat more into his shell. But if you have an offensive coordinator and a system that can kind of encourage him and keep his confidence really high, I do think you can get a really talented quarterback here.
It's interesting. I thought you brought up a good point about like Auburn Bo Nix. Like the people that don't remember Auburn Bo Nix, he was like a meme at the time of bad quarterback play.
He was like
so
Johnny
seeing
Knoxville.
the progression to then to now, to a point Robbie always makes, how can you say he's done progressing? Like it's been every single year since then. This guy has taken massive leaps forward. Well, who am I to say, okay, once he gets in the NFL, that just immediately stops? That's just going to go away. He's done learning. This was the year it stops. I don't know. He has taken massive steps as a quarterback. And then, comfortability in an offense is a big deal as well. Yes, I think that if he were to grow in an offense, that would be beautiful, just like any other quarterback in the NFL. Robbie, the question I'm going to ask you is, I don't think anyone's talked about his legs yet and how you can, I don't know, is he a quarterback that you would like to see designed runs and stuff for? And then also I want to know how much you value that. Is that something you like put a big plus next to if a quarterback can do that?
So before I answer this question, I just want to say you both brought up amazing points about Auburn, and I want to note that in his Auburn career, we went from talking about the guy who could not play in structure at all, was just running around and doing absolutely whatever he wanted, to now he's at Oregon and he just isn't better than that structure. And all he does is these 5-yard dump offs and he's only playing in structure. Like, we got to pick one here. Which one is it? But to answer your question, watching his tape, I was legitimately surprised at the kind of runner he is. Like, he's a plus runner, and that is super valuable for a young quarterback coming into the league, because as we see these guys struggle with making that leap and learning all these different windows and timings in the NFL, they don't really have a lot that they can fall back on. So, quick game windows close faster. All these different things are faster because the NFL players are faster. When you have something like a designed run game that you can lean on when you have a rookie quarterback, that's just invaluable. Like, when you have a guy who can be a +1 number in the box against the defensive front and the defensive box, and you can make the defense wrong at any given time, that's super invaluable while you get these guys who are learning and just learning. Like, that is so invaluable to me.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I like to hear it. I like Frankie. I see you put your finger up. Do you have something to add on to that?
So I was gonna say too, on top of that, he's also a smart runner. Like, he doesn't fumble the ball a lot. Well, he did a little bit at Auburn, but now that since he got to Oregon, and also I think he's probably grown a little bit too. So one thing I will say, he's got massive hands, which, quarterback hand size gets kind of talked about in a weird way a lot, but he kind of uses them in a really cool way. Like, one thing that really stood out on his tape is he'll pump fake the shit out of defenders. It's really fun, actually. I want to say it was the Arizona game where they were just running a shallow cross with their slot receiver, and he just, jacks the linebacker, completely flies out of the way, and then he just soft touch to the receiver over the middle. And he does that so frequently. And I think kind of that also helps a lot, like I said, with his ball security, to be able to kind of, just palm this football in the pocket and not worry about guys necessarily knocking it out of his hands. Even though we were talking about he didn't necessarily receive a lot of pressures, when he did get pressured, it seemed like he was smart enough at knowing when to protect the ball, when to kind of scramble, when to kind of this isn't Jaden Daniels where we're worried about, he's going to put himself in harm's way and take some big shots early on. I don't see that at all. And again, I see a guy that, you're talking about with the running game, he seems like a smart runner, and he has the athleticism to be if you want to make it a part of your offense, I really think you can, especially when we talk about he's probably a top 3 guy in this class as far as throwing on the move. I think JJ is maybe slightly above him, but as you just said a little bit ago, I think I like him more as a passer than JJ McCarthy. And we were talking about this a little bit last week, and I think I kind of am more solidified on this point. I think Bo Nix as crazy as it might sound, because he's 3 years older, might have a bit of a higher ceiling to me than JJ McCarthy, just because, again, I can envision Bo Nix working in a lot of different offenses. I don't think you have to kind of pigeonhole him into the Shanahan scheme like I think a lot of people are, and rightfully so, with JJ McCarthy. So there's a lot to like with Bo Nix, and I think, the negative stuff is definitely there, but if this is a guy that you can get, like, it's weird to say, but like, this is the type of guy where I would understand trading up into the back, the 20s and getting that 5th-year option on a guy, because I do think that the upside is there, that it's like, might as well. But, again, there are also those red flags of he'll be 24 and a half as a rookie quarterback. How much more growth do you really think there can be? That I guess is the big question teams will have to answer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. I want to get into a comment here. It's from D Bronx. He says, my concern for Bo is how much of his progression is tied to putting him in an offense that cut down his ADOT, which is just like how downfield the target is, right? What happens when you put him in an offense that doesn't get the ball out as quick? Robby, what do you make of this comment?
So this is a great thing to point out, and this is a legitimate concern for a lot of guys who see their average depth of target get drastically cut when they go to a new system. For me, it isn't as much of a concern, because on those plays on tape where he is targeting downfield or he's hitting those intermediate parts of the field, it wasn't necessarily an issue for me. Like, I saw so many reps of him where he's working a middle of the field, intermediate concept. He has his eyes to one read. He notices that the leverage is not there for it, works his eyes backside to a backside dig coming across the field from the opposite side, coming into his vision. And plays like that, we haven't seen that in Denver in so long. And for me, if I'm seeing his eyes in the right place and I'm seeing his feet tied to the correct read and I'm seeing him shift his feet when he moves off of these reads, there's nothing for me to be concerned about when we're talking about his average depth of target, because there wasn't a mechanics drop off when he's targeting the downfield more. His eyes weren't jumping all over the place when he looked more downfield. His accuracy didn't take a hit when he looked more downfield. Like, all these things, like, they weren't working in conjunction to make him a worse quarterback when he wasn't just throwing screens and dumping off. So for me, it isn't a concern at all.
Okay. Hey, I love it. I love it. I love it. And Frankie, I'm going to let you get first on Michael Penix here, man. If you're cool moving on, or let's move on from Bo Nix here. I think Bo Nix is one of the more intriguing prospects in this class, especially for Broncos country, because he's been tied to the Broncos more than any other quarterback in this draft class. If you guys go out and look at the mock drafts, I mean, it's been Bo Nix to the Broncos since the beginning of this thing. So yeah, it's definitely like a polarizing figure and for Broncos country right now. But Michael Penix is a guy, at Washington. I think similar stuff to what was that we brought up concerns about Oregon, where Washington's offense was unbelievable. I mean, we're talking about Roger Rosengarten at one tackle, Troy Fatanu at the other, Roma Dunze, McMillan. It was ridiculous. Polk, their offense was insane down there. He put up insane, crazy number these last 2 years. Frankie, what do you make of Michael Penix? What kind of quarterback are we talking about here?
Penix is interesting. It was a very weird evaluation to watch, because again, he's kind of another one of those guys where I was so pulled away by the other prospects I'm watching as I'm trying to be like, oh man, all right, let's see what Penix is doing. Oh, what did Odunze? Oh my God. Stuff like that, where it's like, man, he was a part of a very talented offense, but the difference between, I'd say, maybe some of these other I don't want to take away from Jaden Daniels, but some of these other offenses is like Michael Penix was a very big part of this team being able to push the ball downfield. But I'd said it again, Penix. But the one thing I will say is I think that there's a bit of a misconception about him based on his college football playoff performance that has left kind of this impression of him that I don't think is necessarily super accurate. So we'll get into the injury stuff later and kind of a bit more of those out of the film red flags. But so I can't remember exactly what the order of the games was, but he played against Texas. He played against Oregon, and then he played against Texas. I got it right in front of me. He played against, I don't know. He played against two of the college football games, the first two, and they were incredible. The Texas game from him, he was lighting it up all over the field, hitting some crazy outside of the numbers passes. Like there are 2 to 3 throws a game that Penix hits that I truly don't believe there are like 5 other QBs in the league that can hit. Like he has an insane level of deep ball placement. He's got kind of that Phillip Rivers release, so they just fly in there like javelins. But like his ability to kind of hit these outside throws at times can be very good. Now the problem with that is he is also incredibly inconsistent. So one game you'll be like, man, this guy can really hit every single throw on the field. That's awesome. And the next game you're like, man, you just missed like 4 or 5 layups within the span of like 20 throws. Like, I can't remember what game it was that I was watching earlier. I want to say it was either Arizona or one of their early season games. They only put up 15 points as an offense. They ended up winning, but they only put up 15 points. And he's just missing throws left and right. He's high on outside releases. Like he's a little bit of a sprayer within the 20, 25 yard line. And that can kind of extend downfield too, as well, where I do have a little bit of concern about, we talk about, I think this is kind of, and it's weird because obviously he got really hyped up how fast he ran his pro day. I think this is probably probably the worst runner out of the 6 guys we're going to talk about, as crazy as that might sound to a lot of people. Like, I did not see a guy, and this isn't because he doesn't have the traits to do it. Again, like he's clearly fast enough to do it. I did not see a guy who wanted to run when the opportunity presented itself. I saw a guy who always wanted to try to make the plays with his arm. I didn't necessarily see a guy who was the best manipulator of the pocket when he was inside of it, at least compared to some of these other guys that I think are a little bit better at it. But then, again, we talk about a guy who, when you're getting him outside of the pocket or when he's on the move, I don't think he's super accurate on the run, at least compared to guys like JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix. He'll occasionally have a decent play, but it's usually more when he's rolling to his left and rolling to both sides. So I have a lot more concerns about Penix's film, even disregarding all the red flags that make him infinitely scarier, just because, again, I think this is a guy you're going to have to build a pure drop back type of offense around. And I don't see a guy like when we were talking about Bo Nix, we saw a guy who you could tell this was a guy who's a 5th-year starter. His understanding of the defenses and coverages he's facing is a lot better, I think, than what we're seeing out of Penix. And it's kind of nice, too, because these guys both played in the Pac-12, so they're very comparable, like apples to apples. They played against a lot of the same defenses. We're just, I don't know. I have a hard time selling myself as Penix as this elite player where, again, the flashes are there. The deep downfield ball placement is sick, but you don't see it frequently enough. And I don't think you see enough of the, just the layups to make you feel good about him as like a high-end prospect.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That you bring up some interesting points there. And I think the concerns are there, but I do agree with you. I think as a big time thrower, Penix ranks up there with any of these guys. Robby, what is your ultimate opinion on Michael Penix here?
I mean, Penix is another guy, kind of like Bo Nix, where I went into the tape not really expecting much. Like I wasn't too hyped up to start watching him, but he's another guy who just like really grew on me. Like he's just such a gifted thrower. It's just it looks so natural to him. In my eyes, probably, I don't want to say easily because we have some insane guys at the top of the draft, but one of the better guys at throwing downfield. I mean, most of the time it just looked automatic, but some of the worry there is the guys he was throwing to. We don't really know how much of it was Penix and how much of it was his receivers. Another thing that really struck me when I watched him was he reminds me a lot. His throwing mechanics remind me a lot of early Cam Newton. Cam, when he got hurt with that shoulder injury,
I love
he
that.
he really started to incorporate more of his lower half mechanics after that shoulder injury. But early Cam Newton, almost all of his throws were just pure arm. Like it just looked like everything he ever had on every throw, he was putting it all in there.
Yeah.
And that's what Penix looks like to me. Like he can throw with touch. I'm not saying he can't. There are reps on tape where he absolutely can. But even on the reps where he was throwing with touch, it looked like everything he had, he put into that throw. And that kind of scares me, especially for a guy who has those medicals in his lower half, because all it takes is one hit to that arm and then everything is shot. Like if you don't have a good base, if you don't have good lower half mechanics, everything is shot. Sort of in a way we saw with Cam Newton, even though I thought he was a little bit underrated towards the end of his career. But again, Penix, like he's just such a natural, gifted thrower of the football. For me, the biggest issue becomes there was not a lot that he did that was on tape that was really translatable. Like so much of his offensive production were these boundary down the field shots, and those aren't going to be there as much as they were in college. And I'm not going to be the guy that says college is a completely different game than the NFL. But when we're specifically talking about those concepts, those weren't there, or those aren't going to be there at the rate that they were there in Washington, especially because of the level of talent he had on the outside. I really wish we could have seen more intermediate concepts. He did throw intermediately, but I wish we could have seen more designed intermediate concepts. Like dagger, I wish we saw more of high-low reads on hook droppers. That's one thing. That was one of the main things I'm looking for in rookie quarterbacks on their tape. And I probably saw it the least out of Penix. I would be a lot more comfortable with his game if we saw that 40 speed on his tape. Like
Yeah.
he had like an extra tool in his bag or something he could fall on, I'd be like, okay, I can sort of talk myself into seeing him like all the other guys that are being mocked to Denver. But again, all these different things we saw with I said with Bo Nix, all these things weren't working in conjunction to make him a worse quarterback. It seems like Penix is the opposite side of that, where all these things, his upper half mechanics, he's so rely on, and these low percentage shots that he's seeing such a high percentage of production in college. All these things are just working in conjunction to make him a scary quarterback going into the league.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with you. I think this is one of the riskier quarterbacks in the class, but I definitely, like, you're already hearing it. Coaches are higher on this guy than scouts. That has been a report that's out there now where it's don't be shocked if this guy goes earlier, because coaches have started to get into the film. And they love Michael Penix more than the scouts did. My thing is, I think part of the reason we didn't see, that athleticism on display as much, I don't know if you guys agree with me, but for whatever reason, it feels like he's very stiff, especially when he's going to turn his shoulders and throw. Like that is just like not part of his game. I feel like we would see more scrambling, more stuff like that if it were, but I don't know what it is. It just feels like he's a very stiff athlete in that regard. I don't know if it has to do with the injuries or what's going on there. But I really think that's a big issue with me. And he is so reliant on the deep shots. That's his game. Now, he did have some games. I mean, who remembers Washington, Texas? I think that was one of the most ridiculous games from a college quarterback I've seen. But, yeah, I don't know. It's a scary pick, but it's going to be an interesting one for sure. Any final thoughts on him?
Yeah, last little thought I had, too, is, I mean, from a processing standpoint, I didn't necessarily see a lot of, like, again, like Robby said, he's not really working the intermediate level of the field. So you're not really seeing him too often kind of scan the field. Like a lot of times, again, like these deep shots are usually like 1-2, and that's usually it. And most of the time it's 1. So I don't necessarily think we saw a lot of him kind of having to actually use his, I don't want to say his brain, but I don't think he beat a lot of teams with his brain this year at the Washington offense. What am I trying to say? In the Washington program. But again, that's kind of something where, this is a guy, I think, as we've said, you're going to have to build an offense around this guy in the pocket, at least to start, like until you're really comfortable with the fact that like he's healthy for you. Cause again, we've been into it. He's had 4 season ending injuries before, twice on the same ACL. He had an AC joint separation or whatever it was,
Shoulders,
serious injuries for quarterbacks. And he's had them all by the time he's 24 years old before he even gets to take a rookie snap. Like it's a little concerning for a guy that, like, I think when you envision the offense you really want to put him in, I don't know really how you make it work right away. Like, I think that there is kind of like flashes of the things that you can kind of hope for. And again, if you can really get him to be that consistent guy that you see from time to time, you got a great quarterback, definitely. But it's about kind of hitting that consistent streak. And I mean, how much more time does he have before he finds that consistency?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point to bring up, Frankie. And okay, so last quarterback we're going to talk about here, Spencer Rattler from South Carolina. Who remembers it wasn't that long ago we were having Carson Strong versus Spencer Rattler debates on the timeline, guys. It's just crazy to think about now. Carson Strong already out of the league. I think he's coaching somewhere right now.
Really
I think
good for him.
Yeah, I think it's in the NFL. If I'm not, no, he's now coaching at CSU, helping Norvell over there. So, but yeah, he's helping over there. And then Spencer Rattler goes to South Carolina. Did you guys catch any Spencer Rattler? What do you make of him? Frankie, we'll start off with you.
Yeah, I got 5 Rattler games. Rattler is a fun physical traits type of guy, but also I don't necessarily see a guy that like you don't love the decision making a lot of the time. Like but I will also say the South Carolina offense, like the surroundings, we just talked about 2 guys that came from really good offenses. Really, we didn't mention this about Penix too, but he had a great offensive line. I think they won whatever the award is for best offensive line in the country. So really good unit out there. Rattler did not have that. South Carolina offensive line was atrocious. One of the games I got to watch was Georgia. That was honestly kind of fun because I love defensive line play, but Jesus Christ, that looked scary. I would not have fun doing that if I was Spencer Rattler. But from a pure like quarterbacking standpoint, maybe not like the mental stuff, but as far as like live arm, ability to manipulate the pocket, he moves really well. I think he was like, again, when we talk about decent scramblers, I was shocked with how good of a scrambler I thought he was. Like, he has decent contact balance and actually can run through some arm tackles once in a while, which is like, oh, like, it's a nice little boost. Like, and he's 6'1". I don't remember what he weighed in at the combine or whatever, but he looks decently stocky. He looks kind of like he's got a bit of a Baker Mayfield build where, like, I don't know, you're not just worried about this guy getting absolutely blasted off the field. Moves decently well. Again, live arm, and he's willing to kind of use it to just get the ball into a tight window while he's taking a shot. There were so many plays where a guy would just be bearing down on him, and he just absolutely uncorks the thing to whoever's breaking in over the middle. And plays like that are really fun. So as far as like the toolsy possible developmental backup, I really like Spencer Rattler, actually. Like, I didn't think I'd have as much fun being like, okay, like, this guy can move around a little bit. Like, he's got the arm to actually, like, hit every throw on the field. I know we've kind of said that about a lot of these guys, but truly, like, this guy has a whip to be able to hit into tight windows, and he's a willing passer over the middle, even though, like, I don't think it's so much of his processing, so much of his as he's, like, just fucking fastballing it in there. But, I don't know. He's a fun guy. I'd still... It's tough. I'd probably have him like at 5.5, depending upon, how you want to rank Penix's injuries. But I mean, he's kind of a guy where if you were to tell me this guy got into a system and was like a high-end backup and maybe ended up being like the 25th best starter, I wouldn't be too shocked about it. I don't think he's necessarily going to be a good starter, but I do think he has the avenue and the tools that a coach is going to like him.
Yeah, see, this is classic for me, hard evaluation from the quarterback position, because I like surrounding pieces still matter, guys. It matters a ton. And I want to be able to say the same thing that I said about Bo Nix that I'm saying with Spencer Rattler, where it's like, okay, you had a rough start to your career. With you at Oklahoma, we all had really high hopes for you. And you know what? In a better situation, you transferred somewhere else. You looked a ton better. He went from a situation to a very much worse situation. It's a tough thing. Like, it's hard for me to evaluate, but Frankie, I totally agree with you. I think the tools are definitely there to be a good quarterback in the NFL. He's killed this entire offseason. He was the MVP at the Senior Bowl. I thought he looked like the best quarterback day by day at the Senior Bowl, if I'm being honest with everybody. Yeah, I don't know. He's a tough one for me. Robby, did you check out Spencer Rattler?
I did. And to me, I know a lot of people are either here or there on guys like Bo Nix or Penix, but Rattler is hands down for me the most polarizing quarterback prospect of this class, and I don't think it's close at all. Like, there are so many just mixed reviews on him, and I remember watching him and watching his tape in Oklahoma and saying, this is one of the best deep balls that I have ever watched from a quarterback in college. And granted, I have not been doing it that long, so I don't want anybody to absolutely crucify me and stone me publicly. I like watching him and his deep ball. It was like in Oklahoma, it was automatic. It was Penix level automatic. And he's just fun, man. Like he's really fun. Frankie hit it perfectly. He's got all the tools that a guy would love. And I know a lot of times I sound like the old guy yelling at the clouds when I talk about quarterbacks and their tools and how people react to them. But with Rattler, it's like they all work together and build a quarterback. You see the foundation and you see the foundation you can add with the tools for him. And that's a lot of what makes me like, a little bit hesitant when I talk about tools, because a lot of guys just see a strong arm and a good runner and they think, okay, let's draft this guy in the top 10. And I could not disagree with that more. But with Rattler, we saw pure passing. And that's not something that we see a lot with these toolsy guys, unless they're going one or they're going two, like May and Williams this year. We saw a good foundation. And not only did we see a good, solid foundation, we saw it in a surrounding that was just imperfect at every single turn of the way. Like easily the worst conditions that a quarterback has had to play quarterback in this class, maybe in some of the more some of the classes to come too. Like it was that bad. South Carolina was that bad.
Right.
And it goes to your point. Like it's just so hard to evaluate because we saw him be inconsistent and we saw his eyes just be like flopping all over the place a lot of times. But how much is that because of those surroundings that he's in? And how much is that just because he isn't quite there yet as a quarterback? Like one of the most fluid passers outside of the pocket. And one thing that really shocked me was just how fluid he was in quick game. Like he's got a really good foundation when it comes to quick game passing. And you have a guy who can operate quick game. You have a guy who can also throw intermediately in the middle of the field. You have a guy who also has a strong enough arm to beat closing defenders in that intermediate part of the field. And he's got a good deep ball. So it's like, it's interesting because he has all these things that work for him and make him a better prospect, but his surroundings just make the bad plays, like it just multiplies the bad plays by 10 because he's trying to be a hero and he's trying to make a play when it isn't there. And the plays are never there because of how bad that offense is. So it's like, we don't know how much of this is Rattler not being at the, the certain place where he should be as a quarterback at this stage of his collegiate career, or how much is that just South Carolina being that bad. I see a lot of guys are super high on him, and I 100% could see why. You could definitely take a bet on this guy. I really liked Rattler, something that I didn't think I would coming into it, but that's a common theme with a lot of these guys. Like I don't love a lot of them other than the top two to really say like I want them drafted at 12 100%. I don't love them that much, but I would really like to see any of these guys be drafted. Like it wouldn't be the end of the world to me to see any of these guys go at 12.
Yeah, and to clarify, Robbie's top two are Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm joking. Caleb Williams strike me for Robbie. No, but I totally agree. The one thing, like, I think people get lost in this whole situation. It's like Drake May this year. I wish I had something like with Spencer Rattler, like I did with Drake May this year, where I saw how you looked last year. Now I'm seeing what you're doing with depleted talent this year, and I see why you're making these decisions you're making. Some of these decisions that I don't love, but it's, hey, you have to stick in the game. You're still trying to win a football game here, right? Whereas Spencer Rattler, we don't have that to lean on. It's just a tough evaluation there. Frankie, before we get off of Spencer Rattler, do you have anything you want to add on?
Not really. I mean, you guys nailed it. It was very frustrating when he would kind of make one of these, because like his processing wasn't great, but kind of like Robbie said, it was kind of tough because there were plays where I'd be like, man, like he made the right read there, but the receiver got no separation, or like he has to genuinely like get a throw around a 330-pound defensive player that's just about to crush him. And it's kind of like, it's tough to know, like, are these things that he's not seeing because he just doesn't see them, or is he not seeing them because he's just like, if I see it, it doesn't matter. Like, what does it matter if I see this guy who's blanketed by this nickel the entire game? So, yeah, very interesting to see where he goes. I did kind of want to like pose this question. So, Rattler is probably like, let's do this. So, JJ McCarthy, Would you rather JJ McCarthy as like a top 15 pick, or possibly trading up, or say a trade down for Bo Nix, or would you enjoy just like Spencer Rattler at 76? Which one of those would be your rank those for you guys? I'm curious.
Me personally, I think I would rather trade down for Bone. I'm not the
Bo Nix
biggest
or Penix. Let's say both of them.
Okay, yeah, I would rather trade back for that caliber of quarterback than trade up for JJ McCarthy. If I'm being honest, I don't think the drop off is that substantial like people are making it. I feel like people are falling in love with the idea of that we haven't seen. It's really fucked up that we look at it this way, but I do think people are like, we haven't seen him be a volume passer yet. So what could he be? He's so young. Like that's part of the intrigue about a JJ McCarthy. Whereas like, okay, that's cool, but that's a question mark. With other prospects, that is a negative for me. Why am I get it. We're supposed to evaluate and project here, but like it's hard to project that. I would rather go with the sure thing, or something that I'm more sure of in Bo Nix. And if I can get that and add more capital, I would definitely do that rather than trade up for a JJ McCarthy. Now, if it's a Drake May, different conversation. But for JJ McCarthy, that's where I stand. How about you, Robbie?
I mean, I'm in the exact same boat. Like, I would much rather trade down and get a guy like Nix or Penix than trade up and take a guy like McCarthy, for the exact reasons you named. Most of the projection with JJ McCarthy is just pure projection.
Right.
Like, just for an example, using Nix, like we've seen this guy in multiple different offenses of multiple different offensive coordinators and different structures and different philosophies. Like we can see his thought process in these different areas, and we can kind of get a baseline of what this player could be in a drop back offense to where we can't see that with McCarthy. And I don't think it's an issue of McCarthy. I think it's the same thing with Nix, as I was saying when I started off with Nix, is it isn't that McCarthy didn't have these numbers of plays because Michigan didn't trust him, but it's because they didn't have to.
Mhm.
So it isn't as much a negative for me as it would be for other guys, because in those plays where he was asked to be in a pure drop back situation and put the team on his back, more often than not, McCarthy prevailed in those situations. So I wouldn't say the unknown with him is a negative. I think that's just part of the scouting process. But I'd also say I'd still much rather go with a guy who has like a tangible baseline like Nix or Penix.
Right. Yeah, I think you nailed that. Like it's not a positive or a negative because we just
Right.
don't know. Making it either is where people go wrong. I feel. Frankie, what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to pose it because like I think the idea of catching a guy like Rattler in the third round, even if they have to do like a slight move up or something like that, is honestly like that's a pretty, I think, exciting option. It obviously the best case or the dream case scenario would be them making some miraculous trade up and getting one of the guys, whoever that guy is for you personally. But I also share a lot of the same concerns of a lot of you guys, or with you two, is of the JJ McCarthy of the world, where I can kind of visualize what I think the offense is going to look like. And I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be a bad one. I have a hard time envisioning an elite offense with JJ McCarthy at the helm, barring some massive progression throughout his first couple of years in the league. And I think, when we talk about the Sean Payton of it all, like, I don't know how, we talked about this so much. I don't know how patient Sean Payton is going to be. And I think that when I think about like, all right, you're probably going to want a guy who has a pretty decent floor year one. And that's not me saying JJ doesn't, but there is kind of that argument in my brain where I'm like, I can understand why he might be like, give me Bo Nix, who, has much more I think you can build off of right now. You don't need to training wheels him all day. You've seen him operate in different offenses. He has the arm to be able to layer balls all over the field. You can still do some of the designed running stuff if you really want to. Arguably, I think better than JJ, because I think you have a little bit better of a frame to it. And you have a guy who's, I think, better at protecting the football. He might not be as good of an athlete as JJ. I don't know comparatively what their numbers are off the top of my head. But I think there's the argument that if you're looking for these guys to be ready to go these first couple of years, like I think a guy like Sean Payton's going to like. I think one of these guys that are already 24, as much as it might suck, as a mid-round option, having a guy that has that much experience for a guy like Sean Payton, who's seemingly just wants to plug in someone into this offense and go. He does not want to take the time to babysit, to teach you your 5-step drops out of the eye, whatever. Like, I can understand the world where a guy like a Rattler or a Nix or a Penix might end up kind of being a more enticing option than having to burn all this capital and go get a guy that you're just unsure about. Because we can all be whatever our thoughts are on Bo Nix and Rattler and Penix, but they're a much more complete evaluation than we have of JJ McCarthy right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like, how big of the drop off even is it? Like, that's kind of like, just as an evaluation standpoint, I think people honest to God, I think a big part of it is people being like, his ceiling is really high. And then I'm going to start to question people. Why is his ceiling so high? This is still a question that I have a hard time getting people to even answer. Like why is JJ McCarthy's ceiling so high? What is it? Is it literally just because we haven't seen it yet? Is that the reason why we're all going to say his ceiling's extremely high? And then because Bo Nix has played a little longer, that's why his ceiling is so low. It just is I don't know. I think it's a fucked up model. I don't think it's right.
Yeah, and
I don't think it's correct at all.
Last thought with the ceiling thing too is it's even funny, especially coming off a year where we just had CJ Stroud, where all the pre-talk CJ Stroud draft was this guy's ceiling is like Jared Goff. He's going to be like one of those quarterbacks. Those expectations are fucking gone now. He's the second, third best quarterback in the AFC, probably a top 5, top 6 quarterback in the entire NFL right now. Oh, those pre-draft predictions of like, man, this guy's ceiling is only here. Well, now they're gone. So like, it's another one of those things where it's like, all that stuff gets thrown out the window as soon as it's like, well, this guy's actually good. So
yeah, people like scratching lottery tickets, man. That's honestly what it is. Well, it could be $1 million on here. that's what's going on. I think a little bit. But anyways, guys, I think that's all for today. Please make sure you guys are following Robby on Twitter. He's amazing. He's been an awesome help to Let's Talk Broncos. The Full Field Read podcast between Frankie and Robby. I need another one, by the way. The fans are clamoring. We need one. We need one soon. Any parting words, Robby?
Again, just thank you guys for having me on this platform and be able to talk ball with you guys. It's always fun. Like Joey said, if you want to find any more of my work, I write over on the Let's Talk Broncos website, which you all should be tuned into daily. Refresh that shit every single day. It has the best Broncos content that you will find on this app, whatever app you're using right now. I promise you. You can find me over at Robby_NFL on Twitter as well, or X. Sorry.
Yeah, please do that.
Frankie.
Don't apologize. Yeah, we're straight. Well, guys, you guys can check us out next Thursday. Make sure you're following Frankie as well. Frankie's writing at Let's Talk Broncos. He's amazing. Let's Talk Broncos crew is up. Until next time, guys, go Broncos.